So this was the Randwick Botany race at Heffron Park last Saturday. This was Div 5, which is meant to be equivalent to D grade, and we had a pretty big sized bunch, around 15 to 20 riders. So yeah, a pretty big bunch for a D grade race. And yeah, so this race was a little bit disappointing for me, and I'll get to the reasons why later on in the video. As you can see, it started off pretty quickly. So usually what happens when I've raced here in the past is, everyone sort of clips in and then we roll around a bit slowly for a bit, and then the pace slowly ramps up. This time there was a Randwick Botany rider who just jumped from the start. So you can see we're all already in single file. And I wasn't really sure what Simon, the rider in front of me, was doing here. I think he might have wanted me to go through, but I was just sort of waiting for him to get onto the line. Anyway, you'll notice he doesn't quite get onto the back of the riders in front. And then here, which is about 30 seconds later, two riders sort of jump across and I just follow them. So, as usual, it was pretty windy, and there was like a headwind going along this back straight here, and a sort of cross tailwind going along the finishing straight. Everyone was sort of riding in a straight line here, but I'm pretty sure the wind was coming from left to right. So you can see I'm offset quite a bit, and I'm still getting a pretty good draft. And then this Sin Uni rider comes up on the right side and sort of gets a free ride to the front of the bunch. So yeah, the race started fast and it stayed pretty fast too. So this whole time I've been riding sort of at or above threshold, and it hasn't really slowed up at all. A couple of laps later, we're going into this finishing straight again, and like before, I'm sitting on the right side of the rider in front. And it seems like the rider behind me is not too happy about that. So you can hear him complain. So yeah, there's like a 10-year-old junior swearing in the middle of a cycling race. Anyway, you can see he can't close the gap down, the rider in front. So I have to jump across. It seems like the riders on the front have finally realized that if they ride in the gutter, no one behind gets a really good draft. So from sort of this lap onwards, every time we go down this finishing straight, they sort of hug the right gutter. On the next lap round, we get passed by one of the faster grades. I think this was Div 2. And a bit annoyingly, the riders at the front sort of sit on the back of this bunch. So the pace lifts a bit and gaps start to form. After a bit, Paul, the Randwick Botany rider, he goes to the front and tells the riders to let the gap go and stop sitting on. And then that's what they do, and the pace slows down back to what it was before. This is when things start to go a little bit pear-shaped for me. I'm sitting on Paul's wheel and you can see he's let a little bit of a gap go, but it's not much. And then he decides to take a drink, and then the gap sort of opens up a bit more. So you can see that there, and then he doesn't quite close the gap. So I thought he would be able to close it. I raced against him a few years ago in D grade, and then he's been riding in C grade for like the past 1.5 years, I think. So he was a strong rider, but he just couldn't close the gap. And I thought about jumping across here. In hindsight, I really should have, but the gap just gets bigger and bigger. This is about 10 seconds later, and you can just see the riders in front. And at this point, I'm thinking I really have to do something, otherwise they're just going to ride away. And just as I think that, this rider behind me has the same idea and tries to get across, so I jump on her wheel. The gap closes a fair bit, but if I was nitpicking a little bit, she goes through the corners a little slow. So you can see I gain a bike length on her, and I really should have just jumped across then, but I go back to sit onto her wheel. And you'll notice here again, she starts coasting a bit too long through the corner, because you can actually pedal through, and then the gap just opens up again. And the same thing for this corner, she coasts through, and then the gaps opened up a bit more. And then by this point, I'm actually hurting quite a lot. And then we're about to go into the sort of headwind section, and there's one small rider behind me as well. So we've got three sort of lightweight small riders riding into a headwind section against three sort of bigger riders, strong riders up front. So yeah, we don't really have a chance to be able to close this gap. She was a much stronger rider than me, and you can see she already tried to flick me through, and she flicks her elbow again to tell me to go to the front. So I sort of go to the front, and then I was already really hurting by this point. The whole race was already quite fast for me, pretty much at threshold, and then this little pinch here, going above threshold, and then I'm absolutely spent here, so I flick my elbow to let the next person go through, and the girl rolls through again. And then by this point, you can see a little bit of a gap going on, but I try to get on this other rider's wheel. And then we hit this sort of little hill, the pimple, on Heffron, and then this is like already quite a big effort for me. And I'm pretty much on the wheel, and then that rider then goes to the front, and then I just manage probably about here, I would say. I'm sort of back on the wheel, and then she accelerates, and then I've got nothing left. I just can't follow. So that was my race. I think at this point, so there's 3 riders in front, 2 riders here, and then there's me. But then Paul, for some reason, I was looking on Strava, but for some reason he took a lap out the lap before. So I'm not sure if he had a mechanical or something. So at this point, I'm about 6th position on the road. And then with the guys at the front gone and these 2 gone, I just sort of roll around the last couple of laps. So this race was a little bit disappointing. Not so much that I got dropped. I get dropped in a fair number of races, but more just how it happened. Like if there'd been a massive attack and I couldn't follow, or if the pace was just too fast and I couldn't follow, well, fair enough. But in this case, I mean, Paul sort of drops the wheel a little bit, and if I'd been smart, I really should have just jumped across when I was fresh, but I waited too long, and in the end, I just couldn't get across. And I think, if I had closed the gap, I could have held on for a little bit longer. I might not have been able to hold on until the end, but at least I would have been in the race for longer than 18 minutes or however long it was until I was dropped. And the final thing I want to say is I think there's clearly a couple in this race who shouldn't be riding in Div 5. I know for a fact that at least 2 of the riders in this race had ridden C grade all of last year. So why they're in Div 5, I have no idea. And I think there were mainly 2 on the front that were riding hard the whole race. So if you're able to ride on the front of a race for the whole time, and essentially just ride a group of 20 people on a flat course off your wheel without even attacking or anything, just riding on the front, I think you'll be fine riding upper grade. And the people that won, the average speed was actually 36 kilometers an hour for the whole 30 or so minutes of the race, which is as fast or faster than Div 4, or like the C grade equivalent. So there were a couple of stronger riders. I know the Sydney Uni rider, I think he was like genuinely in the wrong grade, because when he finished, he wasn't on the podium, and I think that's why. But there were a couple of others, I think, who really shouldn't be in Div 5. And I ended up overtaking some dropped riders. So I lapped some riders, and the riders in front, like in the front bunch, like double lapped some riders. And then in the end, I think 3rd and 4th, because of that sort of confusion, were awarded to riders which were double lapped. So I think the average speed was like 29 or something kilometers an hour for those that came 3rd and 4th. For those in the front bunch, they averaged 36 or so kilometers an hour. And my average speed for the whole race, including, after getting dropped, was 33 kilometers an hour, with an average power of around 171 watts.